Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this learning experience brought to you by Splunk. My name is Cody, and welcome back to this learning experience. Now, we've got an exciting program ahead, but before I dive right into things, there are a couple of notes I'd like to review with you. First of all, we are recording today's session, so if you miss any of our conversation, if you'd like to rewatch, if you'd like to share with your team, you will be receiving an email with the link to access this recording on demand, and we'll send you that email as soon as we conclude this program today. Now, if you'd like to be part of our conversation today, there are a couple of ways to get involved. The first option is the easier option, and it is our chat tab on the right side of your screen. When you find that chat tab, I'd like you to let us know from where in the world you are joining us. Now, if you have any specific questions, we would like you to send those questions to the Q&A tab, and you can find the Q&A section on the right side of that chat panel. Now, if you jump over another tab, you'll see there's the handout section. And in that handout section, you'll find a copy of our ebook, which is going to be a little bit of the basis of what our conversation revolves around today. So feel free to grab your copy of that ebook over there in that handout section. And of course, we will be selecting two winners from today's webinar. Two of our most engaged attendees will be receiving a single $50 Amazon gift card, so one for each. So be sure to engage in our chat, send in questions, fill out our survey after the program. So our topic today is building resilient organizations around IT and cybersecurity. I'm joined today by James Brodsky, Group Vice President of Global Security Strategies at Splunk. And we're also joined today by Ed Hubbard, Director of Site Reliability and Monitoring at Travelport. Leading our conversation, of course, is our very own Mitch Ashley, CTO of Techstrong Group and GM at Techstrong Research. So James and Ed, thank you both so much for joining us today. Mitch, do you want to dive us right into our conversation?
Very happy to. Thank you for getting us started on the right foot here, Cody. Great to be here with everybody. Ed, James, great. It's not one person, Ed and James. Welcome. Good to be doing this together with you. And I'm excited because of the variances in our experiences and talking about resiliency, both technology, but we're going to kind of take a little bit broader approach speaking about that. Before we jump into that, how about just give a brief introduction about yourself so folks know where you're coming from. Would you start it out, James?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me this morning, Mitch. And my name is James Brodsky. I'm the GVP of the Global Security Strategist organization at Splunk. I've been at Splunk a long time, since July of 2013. I did a little bit of a detour, went over to a company called Okta for about 7 months, but came back to Splunk in January of 2022. And my team sits, I'm on the field side of things at Splunk. I focus 100% on security. We're kind of the closest thing to a security product organization that you have in the field. And so we introduce all sorts of new technologies from a security perspective to our customers. We help solve the most interesting security challenges, and we do a lot of both internal and external evangelization as well, like this. So again, thanks for having me.
You bet. Fantastic. Ed, how about yourself?
Yep. So if you feel like you've been there a long time, then I feel really, really old. I've been at Travelport for almost 29 years. I work out of our data center group and am responsible for our site reliability engineering team and our enterprise monitoring and really the full observability piece. Basically our data center needs to know at any point in time what our customer experience is. And my groups are responsible for delivering what that customer experience is. And then, on top of that, if they are experiencing problems, then, we're responsible for helping to correct that as well. Travelport is a global travel provider. We power the processing, the compute, the bookings behind a large number of travel websites, mom and pop brick and mortar travel agencies, and airlines, hotels, car rentals, all, anything you can think of in travel. We power a lot of that as well. So, and again, thank you for having me as well.
Absolutely. One of the things I do want to mention before we can jump into our conversation, thanks everybody for joining us, of course, as part of this conversation. And I do mean that, actually. We'd love to have you engage with us in the chat, the public chat, comments, thoughts, reactions, questions. There's a Q&A tab for that as well. The more things you put in, the more you're part of the conversation, and we'll react and respond. And that actually will help and shape, even guide part of where our conversation goes today. So it's a way for you to participate, even though you don't have to turn on your camera. That's the best part. So please join us there.
Mitch and Ed and I are both in Colorado. We're about 100 miles away from each other. I'm in Boulder. I think he's in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
But
my hometown is in Colorado, so I'm just at AWS.
There you go. Lots of love for Colorado this morning. But I didn't tell Ed this, but at one point I was a sales engineer for Sendent Corporation, which I believe is where Travelport spun off from. So it's entirely possible that this is not the first time Ed and I have gotten together in the past. His 29 years and mine approximately.
You're
a long time as well.
100% correct on the Sendent piece of that. Very interesting. Good to hear.
And, we can all tie it back 6 degrees separation from Kevin Bacon too, probably. Right?
Exactly.
We'll work on that.
Excellent. Well, let's get to our topic. I have slides up. This is not a slide presentation. It's just we want to use some of this to kind of set the stage for our conversation. I'll take the slides down, so don't worry. It's just mostly a slide-free zone. So we're going to talk about organizational resilience. There's a lot of conversation right now in organizations about resilience of what we deliver, right? The technology, the platform, the services, the applications, and there's many definitions. One that I kind of like just as a working one, there's no right or wrong, like this is the definition. It's maybe a starting place for us today, so we all kind of know where we're coming from. But resilience is about being able to still be standing when the unexpected things happening. But even more than survival, it's about how do you foster an environment where you can continue to improve and grow and continuous improvement, maybe innovation, even around how you handle disruptions, whether it be security attacks, can be operationally, can be load, can be any number of factors that can contribute to unexpected, maybe even first time experiencing certain conditions that might have impact on our services. Ed, do you want to add to that in any way?
Yeah. So resilience is it's one of those cliche things, and we all talk about it as being one of these new things, but it really isn't. For those of us in a world where our systems, our products are, whatever that our customers are expecting are expected to be up 24/7 by 365, we've been trying to practice resilience for a long, long time. Maybe we've measured it in different ways. Maybe we've used different names, those kinds of things. But when you get right down to it, this is not really a new practice, if you will. How we talk about it, though, is how things are kind of changing, and how we implement it. To a lot of degree, there are a lot of changes as well. Our businesses are expected to be there and to be performing as our customers expect at all times. And I'm a data center guy, right? I'm the guy that doesn't like change. I want stability. I don't want new things to happen. But at the same time, boy, you can't keep up with how agile our businesses need to be today, if that's going to be the case. And so, there's a lot of new practices that are coming around that we need to work on, as an IT industry as a whole. And ultimately, you kind of mentioned it. It's about how do we run the risk of being innovative and our business being agile and moving at the speed that our customers expect us to. How do we balance that with, okay, yeah, they want us to go fast, but at the same time, they expect us to not break stuff at the same time. And building in that, I'll call it, I guess, a fault tolerance, if you will. How do you build that into your processes? How do you build that into your automation? How do you build that into your observability practices? that's really where I see resilience going with this. Is it's not new. It's how do we do it better? With the speed of how businesses have to go today.
James, we're talking also about resilience in the context of organizational, right? So uptime, mean time to repair, 5 nines, 10 9, 9 nines, whatever nines we're shooting for. Those are all traditional metrics when we think about uptime and availability and things like that. When we expand the conversation to organizational resilience, and we're really talking about a much broader thing, not just the technology, but also how we as an organization prepare for change. And Ed, you mentioned change. Hey, we prefer it just doesn't change. It'll be more stable, but we know that won't happen, right? We can't stop that train from moving. I'd love to hear your perspective on this, James.
Yeah, I mean, I come at it again from a security perspective because that's what I live and breathe. And I think that the more agile your organization becomes and the more stable it is, the less risk I'm really going to have in the organization. So resilience feeds into risk tolerance and helps me tolerate more risk because I know that I'm going to be able to recover from whatever happens. It's really interesting, though. As I said, I came back to Splunk after a quick stint somewhere else, and when I came back, everybody was talking about this resilience thing. You couldn't swing a dead cat without hitting somebody talking about resilience. And at the time, it was very much cyber resilience is where Splunk started to think about this. And then we pivoted because we said, well, wait a minute. If we are only talking about cyber resilience from a Splunk perspective, we're missing literally half of our business, which has nothing to do with security, right? Splunk is both a excellent security tool set and an excellent IT and operations tool set, right? So what do we do? So we put the marketers to work and we said, I'm sure there were lots of focus groups, and we landed on this term of digital resilience, which we basically shortcut these days to, just resilience. And the point is, you really never know what's going to happen in today's organizations when the business is going askew because of the systems that are underneath. But, when you coming back to Splunk, like we've been doing this is not new. Just like I said, this is not new. We've been doing this for years and years, combining the data from security systems and IT and observability, anything with a timestamp into a single platform. This becomes a really good match for when I talk to companies, they want to go today, which is to ensure that business agility, when that something goes bump in the night, I want to be able to find it. I want to be able to fix it. I want to be able to put in some detections or some response actions so that it doesn't happen again. But then just coming back to that cyber resilience for a moment, because that's where I live. As you decrease your overall risk posture of an org through cyber resilience, I think as you become more cyber resilient, you can reduce your risk posture. And the reason why is you're looking more closely at the critical systems that are involved. You're shoring up your defenses. You're eliminating large parts of your attack surface as you start to approach resilience. And as I become cyber resilient, it means I can more easily identify data. I can protect data. I can more easily comply with regulations and the oversight that I have to comply with. And ultimately, that means fewer penalties and lesser risk of lawsuits. And that's a good thing for everybody.
There was a great comment that Sharon made and a couple of the positives. Erica, we don't know people's last names, so we use their first names. We're the linkage between resiliency and agility. I think you first mentioned it, Ed.
Yeah.
So you get the prize to start with. What does that mean? How do you connect those two? Are they the same? Are they mostly the same? They're different, but one enables the other. How do you look at it?
I think you said it best there. One enables the other, and you mentioned a minute ago a term that was interesting to me, and how quickly can I restore things? Right, that's a huge part of this. That risk tolerance aspect of this, you can't go fast. You can't be agile as a business. You can't go as quickly as your customers want you to go if you don't have some risk tolerance in there. At the same point in time, boy, how can you be risk tolerant if it takes you 2 hours to recover from an impact, or it takes you 2 hours to realize that you've got a vulnerability that's been exposed? And so the two terms, I think really resilience is the foundation that you have to have in place there, that ultimately you can build your business agility on top of.
Mm-hmm. Very good. One of the things I want to kind of take us to next is in talking about organizational resilience, right? We've already mentioned several of the technical aspects of it, certainly not all, but a really great framework that we use, whether we're talking about DevOps or development or operations, now speaking to this in the context of organizational resilience, is kind of looking at the people aspect, looking at the processes, right? Whether they be manual or automated, in the evolution of those, and of course the technology that should and will continue and grow to enable those kinds of things. Let's turn our attention. I'll take this slide down in just a moment, but just for our audience, that's kind of the framework we're thinking about in resilience now, more holistically, not just operationally or a singular attacks, right? Because there are people behind those things that have to work together to respond when something occurs. There are processes that have to happen that are cross-functional, lots of great things. So, James, you want to give your perspective on this to kind of kick that off?
The thing that resonates the most with me is people, honestly, on this, right? In cybersecurity, you have to have the right people. It doesn't have to be somebody with as much gray in their beards as the three of us have. Some of my best hires at Splunk have been younger folks with no traditional cyber backgrounds, but you could tell that they were the kids that would generally take their parents' electronics apart on a regular basis to figure out how they worked.
Present company included, right?
those people make perfect people for cybersecurity professionals, right? I was that kid. My father's Betamax, it stopped working back in like 1989 because of that. Never worked right after I got done with it. But, I think about the 3 C's that are out there, right? You need people in cyber that are curious and communicative and embrace and worship change. And the reason why there is that adversaries are different every week. Mm-hmm. The targets are always expanding. There's a huge variety. So the ability to roll with those changes that they're going to encounter is key. But these days, right, folks like that aren't necessarily the easiest to find. So we've had a lot of success in bringing in people from different backgrounds on our teams, right? We have a former newscaster on our team. We have several people that were graphic artists before showing up, some theater people, some fine arts majors. I think we even have an accountant, somewhere. But, anyway, without the right people, we couldn't do a single thing, right? Generative AI. So we're 17 minutes in. I got to.
There you go. You said it. You got it in.
Not a replacement, right? Yet. So for people, it's not going to help us write and tune and implement the best processes and technology, right? I need the people first. Although it's really promising, and there's going to be some significant efficiency. It's an efficiency game changer in a lot of ways. If we use it in the right ways. But yeah, people is what I paramount to me.
Ed, the great thing about a framework like this is it helps you kind of structure, how you want to put this together. But it also sounds like it kind of oversimplifies the problem a little bit. People, process, technology is both wide and deep of the kind of things that we might address with that.
Yep. James mentioned you got to have the right people first. But we all know people come and go as well, right? And so use the right people, build those right people. I agree with James. I've got 3 new folks on my staff that didn't come in with maybe the same backgrounds that the rest of the folks did, but they were. I don't remember there's a question in here that said, please please say the 3 C's again. I remember curious.
I had curious.
I heard that. Go ahead, please.
Right. I had curious, communicative, or able to communicate, and the ability to roll with change.
Okay, fair enough. I love that. I'm actually going to steal that. These 3 new guys that I've got, and they're all no gray in their beard, very, very curious types, right? And so they're helping me come in. And we're kind of rethinking some of the things that we've done for a long time. And so that's really good stuff. But, so we've got it there as people, process, technology. I'm going to skip to technology for a second. We all rely on technology. We all rely on, the various tools that we have. And I know there's a question there about what tools and all. we'll work through that a little bit. Obviously, I'm a huge Splunk user, for correlation, aggregation, logging, all the stuff that we need on a daily basis. Some of these new guys are helping us try to rethink some of the things that we're doing. At the same time, you can't go straight to technology unless you have good process in place first. You can automate everything you want to automate, right? And automation is great. But if you don't have a solid process first, all you're going to do is do crappy things faster, regardless of how good the tools are, or regardless of how good your people are. So, when you say the word simple, it does sound simple when you say people, process, technology, but you've kind of got to mix the three of those in there together. And James is right. It starts with good people. But when those people, you rotate through people pretty quickly in this industry, right? And so you've got to build those good, solid processes first, and then you've got to rely on your tooling to help you implement what those processes are.
We have some great questions that are kind of weaving into our conversation and some things that we're talking about. One of the, might think of it as technical, but it's as much process probably as anything, is what kind of security frameworks. Those are great things to be able to adopt because they're defined usually pretty well. They've been proven, oftentimes used in organizations. They're maintained and updated. It also gives you an external kind of reference point. From a security perspective, James, how do you think of security frameworks and what types of them are important to adopt, and how do they contribute to resilience?
Sure. I mean, it's a pretty simple and straightforward answer for me. It's NIST RMF is NIST's definition of cyber resilience first, and there's a 400-page document on that if you'd like to read it. And then RMF, giving some good ways to implement some of the guidance and the findings in that, and everything else is sort of riffing more and similar to the same types of document prescriptions and documentations that's in there, right? So it's that's the one. And I know there are some specific guidance. I noticed we have an international audience here. There's definitely some international guidance out there that are different, right? That I can pull out and send, but none of them are coming to my head at the moment because they just aren't.
Okay, not a problem. There are a plethora of them available for sure.
Yes.
And NIST definitely a great one to start with, if not build upon. Kind of back on the people topic, the third C you mentioned was change. And I think that's one of the hardest ones to train, and maybe it's better to hire for. But how do you identify people that can maybe not only adapt to change, but sometimes even thrive during change?
I look for people that have had significant examples of that in the past. Standard interview questions about adversity and where they have where they have had to overcome massive change happening in an organization, and what did they do. I do think that is something that you can't train for, right? I work for Splunk, and there's all sorts of Splunk EDU courses. I can teach you how to be a pretty good Splunker, right? I can teach you about zero trust, right? But what I can't teach you is having that ability to roll with the punches that you're going to be faced with in an organization like mine. Now, it's important for me to say, I don't have a team that's defending Splunk, right? We have a whole separate operations team that's doing that. I am customer facing, right? So my teams are constantly having to listen to different areas of security that are facing customers and figure out how Splunk solutions can help them better. And so that's the type of change that I'm talking about, right? So one week they may be asked to be zero trust experts. The next week might be detection as code. The next one might be generative AI. And it's always different. Like the things that we're talking to customers about today are not the things that we were talking about to customers 10 months ago. Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And also one of the things we've talked about in prepping for this panel is oftentimes we kind of set ourselves up for failure looking for the purple unicorn that's spotted and has, a gold halo and lives on Mars. They need these 25 technical experiences, of which 5 of them only been around for a few years. It's like the golden list of, yes, sure, you'd love to find, but there aren't people like that, or there may be a handful. What do you have to do instead of setting yourself up for looking for what you really are going to have difficulty finding?
I'm sure on that, but it sounds like that was dead.
I'm sure we both have some there, actually. Yeah. I mentioned that I've got 3 new guys on my team. I'm going to pick on the middle C that you had, communicative, right? Obviously, I'm going to look for a base level of engineering skills for what I need to do, right? And we do all the same questions that you mentioned, James, where you're asking them about their experiences and tell me about a time when you failed, and how did you get past it? All the normal stuff. I kind of, you mentioned the purple unicorn, and so, I'm going to paint it purple once it's ready to be painted purple, and I'll send it to Mars when they're ready to be sent to Mars and all that. I'm going to look for somebody that's got that base level of skill set that I need them to have. But I'm focusing on how communicative they are, right? Because I think I can build on a lot of the other things that are needed to come up with that purple unicorn that I'm going to send to Mars over time. If I've got the right guy that can do that core level engineering, that is easy to communicate with, has good communication skills, maybe that I can trot out in front of my boss with a question if I have to, and go from there. So it's difficult for sure. We're always looking for that one unique person. But there's just not as many of those folks out there. And here lately, my approach has been trying to build that uniqueness into those folks.
One of the things I would add too is also your C about curious. I think of that as people that are highly motivated to learn, demonstrated that over and over, right? Just that thirst for learning, curiosity. But we can program ourselves in our organizations to be plan for risk and handle, how much are we willing to take? Oftentimes we don't do that for change, right? How much change should we expect to take? I mean, there are going to be abnormal times where there's a lot more than we typically have. How much should we expect, right? In the security world, we know a lot of change happens that's outside of our control, right? Threats that are happening, new attack vectors, new approaches, et cetera. I mean, those are happening almost every day. That doesn't necessarily mean we're necessarily adopting to all change, but how do you build kind of that change philosophy into your organization so that you are set up for success as things continue to change over time?
Who is that for? Sorry.
Well, there's only 2 of you. How about James?
James, you want to go first, and then I'll add to that.
I'll go on. I'll go with that, and I'll say yes. I mean, so in security, we constantly are hearing about the latest and greatest threat. Every marketing pitch that I do talks about an evolving threat landscape, new apps that are out there, digital transformation, more data. And of course, we have less SOC analysts to handle all of this. So in order to get back to resiliency, in my opinion, to deal with this level of change, we need a different approach. And honestly, I very often when I talk to security operations, we use the acronym SOC, right? Security Operations Centers, SOC teams are not keeping up with detection. And they're certainly not keeping up with response actions on top of that. They don't have the right detections in place today to detect the threats that are out there. If they do have them, they don't revisit them. Like they'll put something out there, and then what they really should be doing is saying, what's the effectiveness of this detection and how can I improve it? That very rarely happens. It's the same thing for response actions and playbooks, right? So now I've detected something, I actually want to do something with it as well. What I'm starting to find, and this nicely ties back to resiliency too, is that the more advanced and more modern customers are hitting us up about a concept called detection engineering. And sometimes that's called detection and response engineering, right, as well. And the idea here is that we're taking the tried and true software development processes, practices, and applying those to how we handle security operations. So that means it's things like agile development. It's things like a detection and response development lifecycle. It even means concepts like detection as code, which is a little more advanced on that. But there's really huge benefits of this approach, and they're fairly obvious. The fairly obvious ones are I can up-level my detections, I can up-level my response quality, I ensure that I have the capabilities that are built out to address today's threats. That's awesome. That helps me deal with the constant change. It helps me become more resilient. Less obvious is it makes those SOC analyst jobs way more interesting, right? They have a career path. They're not just level 1 analysts. They're not just like detection monkeys, right? That never see incidents through to closure. They help write the detections. They help maintain the detections. And these are the people that themselves are looking at these detections and using them daily. So why not have them contribute to actually creating them? Now I'm improving my retention, right? Now I don't have to constantly retrain folks that come into the organization back to people, right? This is all improving my resilience because if I have a stable employee base that are people that are excited and happy and passionate about protecting the organization through these types of efforts, that's awesome. If they're also developing response actions, now they're automating the daily tasks that they themselves used to do, that helps me increase my scalability as well, right? So, and yes, there's all sorts of different technology you can apply to this problem, but what I just really described, I think, is a nice meld of people and process in order to both deal with change and to make the organization more resilient.
Treating cybersecurity operations, IT operations, anything along those lines, using similar methodologies as your company's software development lifecycle, you're going to grow. You mentioned it. You have better retention. You're going to grow more rounded engineers and employees there that are going to be happier with what they're doing. They're not just going to be, oh, there's an alert, I'm going to escalate, I'm going to call somebody, and then somebody else handles it, and then go back to looking for more alerts, whatever. Right, treating that as a software itself, as a product that you're going to develop yourself. Absolutely, I agree with that completely. I love that approach to it.
I'm curious, are there any industry considerations when we're talking about resilience? If you're in banking and finance, health insurance, travel, for example, in your area, do we have to think about resilience in terms of people, process, technology difference, or is fundamentally pretty much the same thing and we have to adapt in certain areas?
I can talk for ours alone, but I would just, now you got me thinking on that one. My thoughts are, they're going to be generally pretty similar, right? Are there any industry standards here? Obviously we're SOX compliant, PCI, and all that good stuff. And there's a question in here, about cloud backups. Doing all. Yeah, we absolutely have processes that we have to follow on that. We back things up, we store offsite, all those kinds of good things as well, right? Are there going to be some? James probably has a better answer on this than I do. Banking's probably going to have more strict standards than we're going to have. It's kind of going to be all over the place, though. I don't know. You're going to have a better answer on this than I am, I think. Maybe. Yeah. I've been here 29 years. I don't have a lot of experience outside of what we do. So.
My view is there are a number of things that are very common, right? All the things that we've talked about so far probably would apply to all the industries that we've been in. And yes, there are very specific requirements, geography-based, Europe versus US, or wherever you might be, as well as industry and records keeping and compliance and those aspects as well. But I think you can still take the people process technology framework and a lot of things we've talked about and applied that. That was a question from one of our folks in the audience. So really good one.
I do think multinational corporations these days, those industry specific things are getting less and less specific, I would say. We're being driven by, geopolitical influences as much as it is anything, right? So we've had to change a lot. We're our North American headquarters is in Atlanta, but our corporate headquarters is in the UK. We have a lot of things that we have to account for, based on being an international corporation. So,
well, and in public versus private, SEC drives certain behaviors, right? Processes that we have to implement, for sure. Let's talk a little bit about the process side of it. We have been kind of jumping into that. We obviously are automating so much more today. And one of our questions was, how do you teach your organization to develop fast, but kind of balance the security, the delivery into production, and the stability of what we're operating? Because there certainly is pressure on the organization to deliver software more quickly, deliver capabilities to market, respond to opportunities defensively, all of the above. So it's, more, faster, better, but so we have to kind of think of new ways of doing things, but not give up on, yes, and it has to be stable and secure, resilient. I'm particularly interested, Ed, in your experience. Imagine you live this every day.
Fair. You mentioned software. I'm not sure everybody here is necessarily a software company, but everybody's a software company today, right? BMW spends more money developing software than they do developing cars, just as an example, right? And if you're developing software, you've got to be agile. You've got to move fast. And you mentioned it. We started to lay the foundation for part of this earlier, but you've got to get into this notion of being risk tolerant, fault tolerant. How do you do so safely? You do that by breaking down the silos, breaking down those walls between different organizations that account for what quality is, what resilience is. And it's not just developers, it's not just the development side of your organization. It's not just, us on the, again, cyber operations, IT operations, it's got to be everybody involved. Your product teams, right? The folks that are the voice of the customers have to understand what are your requirements? My requirements as a data center guy is, a cybersecurity operations center, what are their requirements in order for something to be resilient? And they have to account for that up front in the design phases of things when they're thinking of what cool new stuff, their customers are going to want. Your architecture teams have to account for these kinds of things as well, because it might be that the voice of the customer wants to do something that might be really difficult based on cybersecurity operations needs. So it's got to be that deal where you break down those silos and everybody has to work together on this, start to finish on it. Failure to do that makes resiliency very, very difficult, because then you've got a bunch of folks that are acting on their own, working on their own ideas, thinking about their own things, and they don't necessarily have I'll call it a systems view. If I do, the old butterfly flaps its wings in, one part of the world, and you have a hurricane in another part of the world, whatever that is, you've got to have folks that understand the system as a whole. And if I do this at this point in time, maybe later on down the line, it's going to cause another problem there. So resilience really requires all of the folks involved in the delivery of value to your customers, understanding what are the implications of their actions.
You could throw easily, and we do, security into that equation too, right?
Yeah.
From your perspective, James?
Well, just real quick before James goes, that might be the most important thing to throw in at this point in time in the world today, right? If that's not one of the initial considerations that folks are making, you've failed already.
Pretty tough to bolt on later, right?
Yeah, James, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And honestly, the silos. It's 2023, and there's still silos everywhere. Every time I go actually visit a customer in person, which isn't that often these days, it looks more like a farm, than it does an office building, because there's so many silos. But part of the problem is that with a technology like Splunk that's been around for 20 years, and we have a significant amount of customers that have brought it in. Oh, we brought it in to do security with it, or we brought it in to do IT with it. And unfortunately, most of the time, people tend to surround the technology and keep it for themselves.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when they keep it for themselves, that really breaks down our ability to become resilient with the technology. Splunk is unique in that we don't consider ourselves a security company exclusively or an observability and IT company exclusively. We are both. Well, you have to use the product across both if that's actually going to pay off for you. Otherwise, you're going to complain and say things like Splunk is expensive, which we won't get into on this particular webinar. But that said, our highest performing customers, right? So, for example, I work often with a more than 100-year-old global conglomerate, and so it's like it's honestly, you would think that there are silos everywhere at this particular organization, but they have transcended those silos, and they're using us as a unifying technology. For them, they're at the point where, unless it was caused by a specific operational issue, like a power outage, something like that, or a cyber issue, like, oh, we're doing a penetration test and we expected this to happen. When incidents happen in their operations groups, an incident becomes an incident, it's an incident. They are at the point now where the security teams and the IT teams are working together to solve that. And so when a P1 happens, it's all hands on deck. And all of those hands, though, they're in Splunk, right? They're running searches on each other's data. They are sharing dashboards with each other that have panels from observability data sources and security data sources. They're sharing alerts, from the same group. And I realize this sounds a little bit like a Splunk pitch, but this is providing the lingua franca, right? So those teams can work together and eliminate those silos. Everybody understands that they're using the same type of tool to gain the same type of insights. So that's like in theory, but in practice, let's talk about what happens. Let's say there's a supply chain breach, right? And attackers out there, they clone a library. They put malicious code in there. You'd have a potentially like an anomalous commit event in your SIM. And then from that, right, Docker containers might rebuild with that new code. Then you're going to have more alerts and more data and more telemetry from that. Then there's possibly going to be some unusual behavior or volume or functions called from your APIs as data might be exfiltrated. So there's more opportunities to monitor there because you're going to see API spikes from your infrastructure monitoring, potentially from your SIM with unusual request traffic. These are all really good examples of like monitoring places, points, data, where if you have something that's stitching them all together and aggregating that into a risk event, both now IT staff and security staff can review, and my silos are gone.
You made me think of one thing as well, right? We tend to think about silos as people, organizations, hierarchy of people, whatever. There's silos of data as well, right? And
like with cloud.
Oh my gosh. I've got infrastructure alerts, I've got cybersecurity alerts, I've got NAS systems that are failing, I got an API that, if you keep all that data siloed and you don't make that visible and you don't correlate all that together, you're going to struggle as well, right? So don't think of silos when we talk about that here. Don't think of that as just as people either. You've got process and data silos as well that you've got to break down, because if I have a back-end switch that fails and it impacts my front-end API, but I don't realize that my front-end API is broke because that back-end, what's the point of having that data in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm. It's a really good point. We're seeing this very, very much so with multi-cloud situations, right?
Absolutely.
A very significant portion of Splunk's customers are hybrid, right? We still have a bunch of on-prem, and most customers, I will tell you, there you go, right, are embracing not just AWS, not just GCP, not just Azure. It's very often it's all three, and Oracle's in there, and some other ones are in there as
well. And I know she used different hands to vote for each one.
We need lots of hands to explain all the different cloud providers that we have. Normalizing the data that's coming off of these, being able to correlate it all together is one thing. The other thing is that it's no longer acceptable, and this is somebody from Splunk saying this, it's no longer acceptable to put all that data in one place. The data needs to live where it's going to live. Data has gravity. I want to be able to access that data, but I also don't want, CISOs hate the fact that I'm going to be copying my data and having multiple copies of it in multiple places. It's not very efficient from a cost perspective, from a storage perspective. It increases your risk. Like there's lots of different reasons to do that. So
yeah, you got to be able to do it. That aggregation correlation of the data, and really where we go back to, we were talking about people. Failure to account for those silos breaks your processes down. And ultimately you're leaning on your people more and more to do that breaking down of silos themselves, that tribal knowledge. I don't know if y'all use that word a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Use it all day, every day, unfortunately. And while it's great to have subject matter experts on some things, and you need that, you can't rely on that. What if they're on vacation? They're on a cruise ship in the Caribbean, and they're the one person that knows how to do this, right? That data, being able to get that data together in one, I'll call it view, James. I know I'm with you. We don't store everything in the same repo either, but I've got access to it. You know what I mean? That's where you get into that mode where you don't have to worry about that guy that's on a cruise ship in the middle of the Caribbean somewhere, because you've built in that ability with your process and your technology to be able to say, oh, okay, Dave's in the middle of the Caribbean somewhere, but I don't need to worry about that because I now know that if these three things happen, your front end API is about to fall over. You know what I mean? So,
Mitch, there's many questions.
I know. I'm trying to think how we weave all of these in there. I think one of them, one I'd like to weave in is, and by the way, folks, if you want to go to the handout section, there's a report that actually we collaborated Techstrong Research with Splunk on, talking about organizational resilience. So it's at the top of the chat. Feel free to download. Everybody that registers gets a chance to have that for free. So please take advantage of it. And we talk about a lot of other things in that particular document. There's resilience externally as well, right? We hire professional services people to come in and do work for us, but also to bring skills and capabilities we may not have any or enough expertise in. That gives you agility, right? You work with technology vendors, right? You work with Splunk, you work with many other vendors to kind of fill out your tool set. But those vendors also have to kind of have a philosophy and an approach around resilience, and because if they're dragging you behind because they can't keep up either, that's not going to help you, Ed, to respond when that guy may be in the Caribbean, but I can't get to that API gateway that's securing that application because this is not part of my my identity management system yet, or some other thing that gets in the way. So talk about the external factor, both enhancing our teams with other skills, but also how do we incorporate resiliency considerations into our vendor selection?
That's a good question. For us, it starts with what's that base skill set that we need? What's that need? What's the requirement that we have as we're looking to augment what we're doing, maybe? And James mentioned it's starting to sound like a Splunk advertisement, but we've had really good luck with Splunk's professional services. We had a niche that I didn't have natively on my team. That was, it literally was affecting my Splunk stack resiliency, right? I won't get too far into it, but we did something that probably wasn't the greatest thing in the world that, was causing me some issues. And so in order to improve the resiliency of my Splunk stack, I needed a specific skill set. So looked around, had multiple opportunities there, and ultimately chose Splunk Professional Services to help me with those kinds of things, right? So, for me, it's about what holes do I have within my org, from a skill set perspective, and looking to do that. You can't make decisions kind of like what we did, in a vacuum, and ultimately it did impact the resilience of my Splunk stack. And so going forward, one of those parts of that equation that we use to figure out, what's the answer to my requirement? How do I get this done? The very first variable I have in that equation these days is, okay, I know I need to do this, but if I do this, am I going to cause problems? Is it going to make my stack perform less? Is it going to be less performant? Am I going to have skip searches or whatever? For me, it really is just, this is one of those variables that I've got to make sure that I account for. And then you choose the right. You hire within your third party, you augment staff segments of work, however you choose to go about that at that point in time. But we learned from experience. We made a bad decision. It wasn't a good thing. It impacted us pretty significantly. But going forward, that's like the first thing we think about.
Sounds like some pretty important lessons learned on that one.
There was a lot.
James, you're on the other side of the coin, right? As a technology supplier, right, to organizations like Ed and many others. How do you see resilience showing up in the vendor selection process? And in your role, then it may be more advisory in other ways, kind of indirectly versus filling out an RFP. But how do you see resilience showing up in your conversation with your customers and people that you work with?
The only place that I don't think that many customers are coming to us and saying, I want to talk to you about resilience, right? I want to become more like, we're almost introducing that topic to them more often than they're introducing it to us. But I think that once we get down to it, it's a customer wants to choose a platform that can be as flexible as possible. And I think that that's very critical, that we're very proud of the fact that we act like Switzerland most of the time, right? I'm not going to play favorites with a Microsoft or a Google or an AWS. I'd like all of those. All of those are fair game, for me. I'm not going to play favorites with cloud or hybrid. And so if I'm going to go into an organization and say, I'm going to help you in general with your resilience, whatever they throw at me, I need to be able to have a solution for. And, I mentioned at the top of the hour that I had gone away and come back to Splunk. One of the reasons why I came back was, and this, I don't realize it, Splunk. We've been saying an awful lot of Splunk during this session, and I'm very aware of that. But I work for a company where I have a technology where I can help you with 1,000 different problems, right? And there's not an awful lot of vendors out there that can say that. So if you're trying, if your journey towards resilience is going to have 1,000 different problems, make sure that you've got a platform that can help you be as flexible as possible. That's what I would say.
Very good. We are, and Cody tossed in the chat, by the way, a link to take a survey, give us feedback about this session and what you liked and what can we improve, and would you share it with other folks? So,
well, and there's a lot of good questions in here. I'd love to maybe use some follow-up if I can and help answer some of them.
You know what, if there's, we have a few minutes left. If there's one you want to pick that you particularly want to jump on, feel free.
It's not entirely related to resilience, but the one on generative AI with SOC engineer assistance is an interesting one. I have opinions on that one.
Let's hear it. Let's go for it.
Sure. I mean, I don't think that this technology is going to turn a bank teller into a SOC analyst overnight, right? But it's really good at making a junior SOC analyst possibly almost as good as a mid-tier or a senior one. That's my hope anyway. So the ability to more quickly analyze security alerts and recommend next steps, right? The ability to write better investigative searches, the ability to summarize an incident both during the incidents going on and during like an after action review as well. It's just perfect for generative AI, honestly. In terms of developing solutions, because that was also part of the question, the ability to recommend new detection searches and response actions and help write them. These are just areas that are going to be huge time savers, not because they're going to take something from 0 to 100, but they may take something from 0 to like 75. And that's really, that's a huge time savings right there. Other things, right? The ability to understand a huge corpus of threat intelligence information and summarize that nicely, both from private sources and from public sources. The ability to extract all different kinds of MITRE attack techniques and suggest ways to subvert the adversary with those techniques. One last one, right, which I think is very helpful. Very often when you're doing some forensics, you might have an interesting script out there that you have to understand. You might not know the first thing, especially if you're junior, about Python or PowerShell or whatever. If I can feed that into a generative AI, and the generative AI is going to say, I think that this script does X, Y, and Z, that's extremely helpful. Now I don't have to go stand up a safe environment and fire off the script and actually see what it does, poking and prodding it, myself. So, but we believe that no matter like all that stuff I said, we still need to have a human in the loop at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
The augmentation from all of those different AI capabilities is going to be pretty cool.
Yeah.
How are you looking at generative AI, Ed?
Cautiously. Yeah, we're looking at it in multiple fronts, whether it be some back-end data, trying to pre-populate cache for certain request types, whether we're using it for AI ops type things, for cybersecurity operations type things. Absolutely, we've got one, we have an entire organization that's data and analytics. Definitely moving in that direction. I think if it took us 17 minutes, James, you said, to get to that, that's not very dang long. You're not going to be successful these days if you don't at least have some sort of a strategy for how to get there with it. We have a strategy, we're working towards it, but we're being cautious about it at the same time. James mentioned it, you've got to have people there as well, and we're making sure we get that right balance.
Very good. One of the things I'd like to kind of close with, we have just a few minutes, so I'm going to give Cody a little bit of time to wrap up so we can end up on time. But when we talk about people, process, the technology, it's not as independent thing. It's about how those things, the flow is happening across all of those. The technology is enabling it because you've got, data either integrated or co-located into one tool or platform, data management platform, like a Splunk kind of situation. It's also cross-functional workflows, right? I'd love, Ed, if you would talk maybe an incident management, not a specific example. I'm not looking for you to disclose information you shouldn't, but
Sure.
how is that workflow changing as you think about more cross-functionally people working together in that way?
Yeah, and I can do this and answer a few questions about fail fast, fail often, DevOps, DevSecOps, SRE, all of that, right? I've kind of talked about this a little bit already. We're trying to get out of the business of having individual subject matter experts over individual applications, products, whatever, and trying to get more cross-functional with how our folks work. By the way, DevOps versus DevSecOps, it's the same thing. If you hear somebody say DevOps, they really mean DevSecOps, even if they don't realize it. If you're not taking, I say this a lot. I teach our DevOps classes here. If you're not taking security into account on all the stuff you're doing, you've already failed, right? The SRE team that I'm building is a really good example of that, though. I have 3 SREs that have a very broad background. They're very much subject matter experts at individual things. But as we work towards tearing down those silos, people and or data, process, whatever, they're right in the middle of it. And the more that we tear those things down, the better they are at understanding things at that system level. If I make a change early on, what's it going to do to the process, 10 applications down the path or whatever? We've got to get out of that notion of having one individual who's a subject matter expert for each thing, because let's face it, we all have complex systems, right? And yeah, I might have an API impact, but that API impact might be caused by 100 different things, and you never know which one of those 100 things is going to happen. And I don't want to have a bridge of 100 people on there that I'm managing, trying to figure out which one of those things it is that broke my API. And so trying to get more cross-functional with that. And again, it's development teams, it's platform engineering teams, it's network engineering, whatever it is that's required there. We're trying to build that cross-functional network, that cross-functional visibility, observability, so that we can see how all that works, because ultimately that's where your resiliency comes from. I'm going to go back to a word that James used earlier, recovery, right? If you can't recover fast, you're never going to embrace that risk that you need to be able to embrace in order to move quickly.
Great. You know what? We wish we had another hour, and we probably still have more questions than we could answer. And so I really appreciate from our audience participants for doing that. We will follow up with any questions that we didn't have time to answer from both Ed or James' perspective, and help you as much as we can. So those aren't still hanging out there and got to fall off. We will definitely follow up with you on those things. So thank you for participating. James, Ed, it's been certainly an honor and pleasure of mine to be doing this with you. I hope our audience, if you didn't get a chance to download the report that we released today on organizational resilience, it'll be in an email that Cody's going to tell you about in just a minute here. So before I sign off, I would like to say thanks to, of course, Ed and James, Cody, also Beverly on our team, who's been instrumental in making this happen, and Whitney. We appreciate everyone contributing to bring this together. So back to you, Cody.
Thank you, Mitch, and I'll echo that. Thank you to Ed, Ed and James for joining us today. It's been an action-packed hour, and we'll see if we can get you back for another one.
That's good. Thank you all.
On that reminder email, so we will be sending you a copy of the recording in that email, so keep an eye out for that. You can also find the recording living on the Security Boulevard website. That's securityboulevard.com/webinars, and it will be in the on-demand section. As mentioned at the top of the hour, we will be selecting 2 participants to receive a $50 Amazon gift card. So if you haven't been the most engaged today, feel free to send in a survey, and that'll qualify you as well. But with that, I'd like to thank Splunk for sponsoring our program, and to everyone who's attended today, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you joining us, and we do hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.